Welcome back to the channel, Failed Trade Talks with the United States, presented by Truth Bombs and based on research by Moose on the Loose. Why they have stopped and who actually is responsible. The answer may surprise you, and it's not Doug Ford. Let's get into it.
We finally know what happened. Welcome back to Moose on the Loose. My name's David. A new report coming from Politico reveals exactly why the trade deal between Canada and America imploded back in October. Here it is from Politico, 16 days from momentum to meltdown in Canada-US trade talks. This article has an insider who basically names everything that happened here, why the trade deal blew up. It says Prime Minister Mark Carney left the White House early in October with Canada and US in reach of a trade deal. This appeared to be imminent. It says here inside the meeting, U.S. officials were enthusiastic about a possible agreement covering steel, aluminum, uranium, and energy. Canadian and American negotiators were told to put the framework on paper with the goal of finalizing an interim deal before American Thanksgiving. It was an awesome meeting, said Pete Hoekstra, U.S. ambassador to Canada. He recently told Politico, it went so well that President Donald Trump invited Carney and his delegation back into the Oval Office to show off the White House ballroom plans, even asking the Prime Minister for advice on the design. The Canadians were then ushered into a nearby office and offered Trump-branded memorabilia. During the discussion, Carney brought up Keystone XL pipeline, which would transport oil from northern Alberta to the U.S. Midwest. They almost jumped across the table to embrace their Canadian counterparts, said Hoekstra. They were thrilled. Going on here, it says the deal would have introduced tariff rate quotas on steel, permitting a fixed volume to enter at lower tariffs before higher duties applied beyond that threshold. According to an official familiar with the Canada-US trade talks, the individual, like others interviewed for this story, was granted anonymity to speak candidly about the negotiations. So this article goes on to say how Doug Ford was blamed with his ad, but it really wasn't Doug Ford and this Reagan ad that was a catalyst that broke this deal. This was just the front that was put up. Now, they don't mention why. I'll get to that at the end. Here's footage back from the end of October. Mark Carney knew what was going on. He chose to let all of this fall on Doug Ford's shoulders.
Timing is everything. Trade talks with the U.S. reportedly fell apart after a letter was sent by MP Mélanie Joly to representatives in the auto sector, where she threatened to sue Stellantis when it announced it was moving production from Canada back to the U.S. Those representatives then informed officials in Washington, which allegedly raised concerns and sounded the alarm. After the letter was sent, the trade talks stopped. Around the same time, Doug Ford met with Mark Carney about running his controversial ad. Carney gave his blessing, and 2 days later, the ad campaign was launched. As a result, some argue that Doug Ford became the fall guy for the failed talks. But questions remain about who was really responsible for the breakdown in the trade talks, until Politico ran this story this week, and now we know. So, was Doug Ford set up?
President Trump says he's canceled these trade talks because he's upset about the Ontario government ad. We've heard from the Business Council of Canada and even some of President Trump's own advisors who suggest the frustration with Canada runs deeper. So is this about the ads or is this about something else?
I would suggest you take the president at his word for his reason. Those ads came, the president had the reactions which you have seen, made the decisions that he has made, which, you know, those are his decisions to take, and we're in the situation we're in.
It says 3 officials familiar with the negotiations say talks had already started to fall apart, and this was before the Doug Ford ad. It says concerns were growing about the auto sector was being left out of the deal, along with backlash over Industry Minister Mélanie Joly's threats against U.S. automakers, which added another irritant to high-stakes negotiations. While the public followed over the ad made headlines, it was finer policy details out of Ottawa, particularly around autos, that alarmed Detroit. On October 15th, the day after Ford announced the anti-tariff ad, Canada's industry minister wrote to Stellantis Chief Executive Officer Antonio Filosa, threatening to sue the company over its decision to move its Jeep production plant from Brampton, Ontario to Belvedere, Illinois. After the companies announced plans to cut jobs and scale back vehicle production in Ontario, Joly also threatened to claw back millions the government of Canada had doled out to Stellantis and GM. So basically, Mélanie Joly, her actions with the auto industry created a big rift. She pissed off the industry, and the industry is very prevalent on both sides of the border. That industry and those CEOs got really angry about this. It says here on October 23rd, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Joly reduced how many vehicles vehicles, Stellantis and GM could import tariff-free, effectively raising their costs. That evening, Trump abruptly halted all trade negotiations with Canada. While the president blamed the high-profile Reagan ad for the collapse in talks, one official familiar with talks between auto executives and White House officials claimed the ad was largely a pretext.
Are you upset at Premier Doug Ford for running this ad? If this is true that this ad spoiled something that was very close?
Look, I'd say the following, which is that in any complicated, high-stakes negotiation, you can get unexpected twists and turns, and you have to keep your cool during those situations. It doesn't...
Like your trade minister blowing up the entire negotiation. You could see he was looking down, he's scanning around, he's not looking these reporters in the eye. He obviously doesn't want to tell the truth of what happened here.
Pay to be upset. Emotions don't carry you very far. And we had made progress, to repeat. And we stand by the progress that had been made, the government of Canada does, and we are ready, when appropriate, to pick that up. And I'll just re-emphasize that it is the responsibility of the government of Canada to have these negotiations.
He knew exactly what happened here and let it fall all on Doug Ford's shoulders. And
They're elected and they make decisions, and sometimes it makes life a little more difficult, but that's...
Did Doug Ford make life a little more difficult?
With the ad? Yeah, well, yes he did. Yes, he did. I mean, but he knows that, and Doug, don't yell at me for pointing out the obvious, but that was true. But you know, on the other decision...
This is not leadership. Carney is not leading. He never takes responsibility for his own failures. Goes on to say here that now they had to pay a tariff to bring cars into Canada, both Stellantis and General Motors, and that's what's really triggered them and sent them to the White House, the official who's familiar with the conversation said. The official alleged the real issue had to do with mounting frustration within the auto sector over how Ottawa was handling the file, a view echoed by two other officials, one of whom said the breakdown had more to do with industry anger over the Canadian government's posturing on autos. So the way Carney handled things and the way Mélanie Joly handled things, the Canadian government, the Liberal government handling things, was the real problem here. Threatening to sue, yanking the companies around, not properly negotiating, and then instead they blamed it all on Doug Ford. And he was an easy out for the Liberal Party. They could just point it all at him and say it's all his fault and not have to take any blame for this. Goes on to say Joly didn't respond to the claims, neither did Canada-US Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, though his office said in a statement he has a goal of getting the best deal for Canadians and families. One of the officials based in Canada said Joly's actions inflamed a very important ally, noting that US automakers have been key partners in making the case for integrated cross-border supply chains. It's not going to be Canadian politicians or Canadian businesses that convince US lawmakers or President Trump to eliminate tariffs and get back to free trade, the Canadian official said. It's going to be American businesses, and we have to be very, very careful on how we treat those partners. Mélanie Joly pissed off key members of the business community in America, and this whole thing completely imploded. Going back to October 28th, 2025, this is Pierre Poilievre's press conference in Parliament. And what did Pierre say? He got this whole situation right from the start.
Of Doug Ford, I'm wondering what you think of how that was handled, whether or not that ad should have been pulled faster.
It's a good question for Mr. Carney. Mark Carney approved the ad, and then he claimed, after the ad started running, that the ad was the reason why no deal happened. So it's time for Mark Carney to come clean. He claims he was on the verge, once again, claims that he was on the verge of getting a deal. Then he approved the ad, and then he blamed the ad for the fact that there is no deal. So the reality is that premiers are stepping up to fill the void left behind by Mark Carney's broken promise. He said he would negotiate a win. He said he would have a deal by July 21st. Still no deal, still no win, still no elbows, still no jobs. If I could. And now Mark Carney is looking for someone to blame for his broken promises, and he's blaming an ad that he approved. So it's time for Mark Carney to stop blaming others and start keeping his promises. His promise being that he would get a deal, that he would lower the tariffs, and then he would get the job done. He has not done that.
You said it right there. Blaming someone else. Pierre called him out, blaming Doug Ford when really this all fell on Mark Carney's shoulders. Mélanie Joly was not fit for the job, and Canadians have been the one to pay the price for this.
As always, let us know what you think in the comments. See you next time. Thanks for watching. This is Turtle Island North, driven by facts, not feelings.